Very pleased not to be joined here, blogging the boys, by the one and only, the dashing, the debonair, the internationally famous. You know him from your resident Rocket League matchup. I know him from my resident chess matchups. It is from Baltimore Beatdown, SB Nation's home for Baltimore Ravens content, Kyle Barber. KB, what up?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me here.
Right.
I did change the byline, which could throw off the intro. My byline is Kyle Phoenix now. I don't know if you saw that.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I know you as Kyle Phoenix, but
For sure.
I mean, it's all. I actually made an awesome joke right before we started recording. Kyle and I mentioned how the East Coast is basically like everything is the same. Like it's just one. The word I used was actually blob. Like everything is one blob there in the same part of the country. And Kyle Phoenix, Kyle, whatever. I'm not here to dox anybody. It's all one big blob. It's your own personal big blob.
It is. It's my middle name. It's not just some random, oh man, I wanted to pick something cool. It is cool though, but I've been rocking Kyle Phoenix for about a year now.
It's cooler that it's your middle name. My cousin,
Yes.
I've never told you this, but my cousin, who I'm very, very close with, we do Madden franchises together. I'm actually the Ravens in our franchise this year. He has always used Phoenix as a pseudonym of sorts, in usernames and things like that. When I first saw yours, I was like, oh, he's just copying my cousin, and he's my cousin, so I had his back over you. You know what I mean? But yours is different. Yours is, literally and governmentally correct.
Indeed it is. But I'm happy to talk football with you. It's not going to be the most pleasant because the Ravens are in the midst of their first 0-2 season in about 9 years.
Well, you say that, and I was going to get to this at a certain point, but the Ravens, I like to put the Cowboys drought in certain perspectives sometimes. It's literally the whole Ravens existence. Literally the entire Baltimore Ravens existence is the Dallas Cowboys drought. They first began play in 1996. That was when the drought was born. Another way I like to put it, that was I don't know if you know this, Marvin Harrison Sr.'s rookie year. He played his whole career on a Super Bowl himself, retired, sat out the mandatory period, was enshrined to the Hall of Fame, had a son who had a wonderful collegiate career himself, and is now fresh off of his NFL, not literal debut, but, like badass debut. So it's been that long. And anyway, the 1996 season for the Ravens featured them starting 1-2, but they've only started off 0-3 a singular time in franchise history. And it was 9 years ago, as you mentioned, that 2015 season. Are you worried that 0-3 could find the Ravens once again here in 2024?
It's certainly a possibility. Where the Cowboys are strongest, tends to be where the Ravens have been weakest through the first 2 weeks.
Where do you think the Cowboys are strongest? Because I'm sorry to cut you off, because right now the sky is falling. Like our pets' heads are falling off. You know what I mean? Like everybody is super down bad. So I think everybody scoffed when you said that. It was like, where are the Cowboys strong? Like Micah Parsons, is that it?
Micah Parsons and just a strong, solid defensive line against porous offensive line right now. The Ravens have struggled since they made their offensive line changes. Andrew Voorhees, who redshirted last season because the Ravens drafted him after he tore his ACL at the Combine, so he waited a year. He was expected to be further along than where he is at right now. He's really struggling as a left guard. Right guard is Daniel Fa'alele. He went from being a right tackle. He's 6'8", over 300, well over 300, and he's being put in at right guard, which is a serious contention point between the Ravens fan base and just the production from where he's at. He's not proved himself as a viable right guard. He's too big. He doesn't seem to have the movement. And then at right tackle, there's the frustration of the Ravens have been rotating their tackles on the right side. It's Patrick McCary for most snaps, and then they'll put in second-round rookie Roger Rosengarten, and back and forth they'll kind of rotate them in. Rosengarten actually kind of excelled against Max Crosby last week, but he didn't see the majority of snaps, and now there's a curiosity of whether or not they'll put McCary, who's essentially the Ravens super sub, and put him at right guard. And so offensive line struggles against elite pass rushers through 2 weeks has not been pretty. Chris Jones in the Thursday night football game in week 1 was actively pointing at and just like cherry picking which guy he wanted to beat. It was very unpleasant to watch because he just would, like, it didn't matter if his teammate's assignment was that gap. He pointed at the guy he wanted and then just pushed the hip of the dude to get out of the way and then did the thing. Max Crosby feasted. He won AFC, he won Defensive Player of the Week this week after hunting down Lamar Jackson and just causing mayhem against the Ravens. And Micah Parsons is arguably a better pass rusher than Max Crosby. I mean, those guys are both elite pass rushers, and that's going to be a problem. On the defensive side for the Ravens, they have the third worst pass completion rate against them. They've allowed about, I believe, 76%. Only two other defenses are worse than them. And they've particularly struggled against elite wide receivers. Last week, it was Devontae Adams, who went over 100 yards, helped
In the
lead
big second half, right?
Enormous second half. There's a guy named CeeDee Lamb that plays for the Dallas Cowboys. Don't know if you heard him. He signed this big fat contract, got a lot of money, earned a lot of money, and he tends to cook. And not a guy that after you've had a really struggling couple weeks against wide receivers to then go up against the dude that can post 1,700 in a season. And you have, Dakota Prescott who can throw the football around. And if the Ravens offense can't solve their woes, and, even it's gotten to the point where even kicking has become somewhat of a concern with the Ravens, because Justin Tucker is 1 of 7 since the start of last season from 50 plus. Meanwhile, your boy Aubrey, who I have a great appreciation for, my documented history of
I was going to get there.
Kickers. I know. I'm jumping straight into all your stuff. I'm like, yeah, no segues here. I mean, he super leg. I mean, this guy's nuts. I don't know if you know, but he also played soccer apparently at one point.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah. Jimmy Graham played basketball too.
Yeah. Ryan Fitzpatrick went to Harvard, just so we can kind of hit bingo here. Okay.
There we go.
I do feel like, to start, this is a game of like, no, we're down bad more. No, we're down bad more. You know what I mean? Like that. I think these are two, teams, or two fan bases at least, that are both feeling very sorry for themselves. But where I would push back a little bit on this is, we've been here. Like we've been on this hill. Like the Cleveland win, maybe kind of, we were starving for a little bit of positivity and we got it, and we kind of, maybe ate a little bit too much of it. But the Ravens entered this season with all sorts of hype. I mean, what specifically broke that? Like, what specifically flipped your perspective upside down to where now it is a little bit of sarcasm? Like, oh, I guess, like, oh, we kind of suck, like, blah, blah, blah. This isn't the way I knew you to, be approaching this season a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I was excited. I've been so passionate about the excitement for Ravens fans this season. Derrick Henry's a Baltimore Raven. That's such an incredible statement to make, because he's always played with the barbarism of a Ravens running back, a physical presence. And that was such a joy to like imagine and fantasize about. And it didn't really come to fruition through the last 2 weeks. We got a glimpse of it against the Raiders, but overall the blocking hasn't been there for it. And so you're asking Henry to just make magic happen, and it's not coming about. I think the big issue is just, for 9 months, all that's been talked about in the Ravens fan base has been an AFC championship game that went awry, coaching frustrations from this fan base, Mike McDonald leaving, and Ravens fans were just like, we should fire Harbaugh, even though he made the AFC championship game, and just hire Mike McDonald as our head coach instead. Like, we should just make that transition anyways. Then you saw a bunch of other coaches leave, Anthony Weaver, Jannard Wilson. I mean, it was just a huge brain drain, is what the popular pundit term is right now. And then for 9 months, we just talked about the Chiefs. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl. They beat the Ravens to get there. And then an offseason of how the Ravens going to be able to beat the Chiefs. In all the PFF rankings, it's like, who's the number one player? It's probably a Chief, Creed Humphrey, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes. And then
a little bit of
number
brother
two?
energy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then who's number 2? Mark Andrews, Tyler Linderbaum, Lamar Jackson. Like, everywhere, it hasn't been escaped. And then when things started to cool off, what's the schedule release? Ravens, Chiefs, opening it up week 1. Training camp grind. You're preparing for Chiefs. Like, for 9 months, that's all that has been discussed. And so that finally, win or lose, that game was never going to go positively for Ravens fans, and I talked about that because if you win, wow, you should have done that 9 months
Right,
ago.
right.
If you lose, you're like, wow, you still can't beat them. If you beat them by running the ball a bunch with Derrick Henry, wow, if you guys would have stuck to the run game 9 months ago, you could have been in the Super Bowl. Like this was a bad thing, and so I was so excited to turn the page on that and be like, all right, next on the schedule are the Las Vegas Raiders.
When you have to wait a
Favored
little
by
bit too, and you have to let everyone like pick
Mhm.
apart the game because it's the first
Yeah.
one. Everyone's super excited. So everyone
Oh, yeah.
tears you apart, and you have to watch
Yep.
all these other teams have success. And you watch Sunday night football, even Monday night, Thursday night again, and then it's like, okay, here we go. And I'm sure that tugs at the like, well, Gardner Minshew did it last year with the Colts,
Yep.
the best team to ever come from Baltimore, right? I'm sorry. So, but so the Gardner Minshew common denominator again. I can see how that would sort of
Mhm.
tug at the thread of insecurity.
I mean, that was definitely a concern. I think the Ravens weren't underestimating him this time. I think that may have been at some decree or some level something from last season, but this year, like this dude did it against us, and we stumbled upon ourselves and never broke free, and that's been an issue for what feels like years, certainly since about 2022, that the Ravens, I hate this term. It's such a Skip Bayless term, but like, where's the clutch gene? Where's the clutch factor? Where
Mhm.
where where are the fourth quarters that the Ravens just handle business? That was something they did in 2019 if they didn't already have the game blown out by then.
Right.
But I mean, it hasn't felt like the Ravens just go in there and take care of business in the fourth. Hey, it's a close game or it's a 10-point lead, and then they never relinquished it. And I think and that's what happened yet again. They let an inferior opponent. They were favored by 9.5 at one point in this game. They
Biggest
were the
favorites
highest,
of
biggest
the
favorite
week.
in week
Yeah.
two. Yep. And they let them hang around and they kick a couple field goals and they never step on the throat. And then third quarter comes in and they go up by 10, and then it all starts leaking. An interception kills a drive. A punt goes for 24 yards after you're tied up and giving them great field position. Just the struggles of a team that are always so good, but it almost felt like the energy when they scored to go up 10. It was like, all right, we've locked this thing down. It's like there are 7.5 minutes, and the energy in the stadium is nowhere near where it needs to be. Like, no, there's not even, it wasn't even like celebration. It was just like, yeah, they're up 10.
So hearing your perspective, I
Mhm.
I think a lot of times we're so quick to say like, oh, this team, these are the Ravens of the NFC. I don't know who maybe Ravens fans deem that to be, but based on your kind of pulse and the collective Ravens fandom's pulse on this, I would say that these two teams are akin in terms of, especially Baltimore's now been the number one seed twice. Obviously got into an AFC title game, which is very different than what Dallas has done. And I mentioned the fact that their entire existence is all of Dallas's drought. But I do think that on some weird level, the two MVPs for Lamar are very annoying because it's like, well, he's got two MVPs, but like all people want to talk about relative to the MVPs is how he fails, and how they fail. And so it becomes this like, cloud as opposed to this like bright shining sort of thing that you can, hoist up or whatever the case may be. And for Dallas, it's you can't get to the NFC Championship game. And to your point, kind of about week one of the Chiefs, the Cowboys could come out and boat race the Ravens. They could respond well from last week, and people would kind of be like, well, why couldn't you do that against the Saints? Why couldn't you do that against Derek Carr? So what? You're doing it in September. Like, do it in January. Like, there is a little bit of like, prove it to me when it really matters with both of these teams. I think that maybe Ravens fans don't feel that. I don't know what Ravens fans feel about Mike McCarthy, but I regard John Harbaugh to be an amazing coach. I regard Lamar Jackson to be an amazing quarterback, Derrick Henry to be an amazing running back. That's why, I mean, I can't believe how down and Eeyore you are about all this. I'm picking the Ravens. I'm picking the Ravens right now because this is a Cowboys team to kind of, take, the mic and hate on my team now, has allowed 44 points in back-to-back games at home, counting the playoff loss to Green Bay. They are the first team, Kyle, since we landed on the moon as a race, as a like society. Like it was 1968 the last time a team allowed 44 points or more in back-to-back games at home. The Cowboys are in that company. And, it's one thing like maybe, the Texans of 2008 ran into prime, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady back-to-back weeks. That's unfortunate. No, it's Jordan Love and Derek Carr. Like, these are the two dudes lighting their team up and just embarrassing them over and over and over again. And on top of that, if you want to, like, play the vibes of it all, the Cowboys have a really weird and wonky history with the Ravens. Obviously, the last time these two teams met up was in 2020. That game took place on a Tuesday. It was supposed to be Des Bryant's debut and chance at revenge, and then he, I think we forget this chapter in Cowboys Ravens history. Wound up on the COVID list like 5 minutes before kickoff. That was super dramatic. That was a crazy game, obviously, but it was an Andy Dalton start. The time before that in 2016, I don't know if you remember this element to it. Dallas won, and it was the first time the Cowboys ever beat the Ravens, and that was at AT&T Stadium. That was the first game that Dallas played after Tony Romo's "Football is a Meritocracy" speech. So that was the first, like, he has ceded the battle. He has waved the white flag. Dak has officially taken over the job. Obviously, in 2008, the two teams met up in the final game at Texas Stadium. I was at that game personally, so I really hate the Ravens for that. So yeah, like, the Ravens have existed as this really strange thorn in the Cowboys' side. And so right now, with them down bad and everybody expecting them to fail, with Derrick Henry, who kind of effectively said he would have been a Cowboy if they had just picked up the phone and called him, I fully expect Derrick Henry to go for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in this game, because look what Alvin Kamara just did.
I mean, the Saints offensive line and the scheme of a Shanahan styled offense, which is apparently some sort of kryptonite for Dallas.
It's not. It's not some kryptonite. Like, it's. I don't even know what it is. Like, I'm trying to come. It's more than that. It's a tranquilizer. Like, it is. Yeah. It's a paralytic, parasite. Like, it's actually. Yeah. Have you ever seen 8-Legged Freaks? It's the big spiders. Like, that's exactly what it is. It's horrible. They and you talked about the Ravens, like, when was the last time they kind of salted the game away? I've been, talking to other people this week and doing other things. I cannot for the life of me recall the last time the Cowboys took a punch and stood up, because anytime lately, the last year and a half or so, somebody has gotten out on top, somebody's, thrown the first punch, they fold, they wither. The last time I can kind of give them credit for it, I don't know if you remember, in 2022, they played the Eagles on Christmas Eve. It was a crazy back and forth game. Speaking of, Gardner Minshew was the quarterback for the Eagles. That was in the middle of Jalen Hurts' injury situation. But you could asterisk that and say, well, it wasn't even Jalen Hurts. So good job standing up against Gardner Minshew. This is a team that feels like a little bit of a front runner right now. And so in a weird way, they kind of need this Ravens game too. But I don't see any world where John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are 0-3 with the Bills and Bengals coming up next.
That's another part of, like, this feels like a game. It's so bizarre to go off feeling. Like, I look at numbers and data and try my best to do matchups and stuff. But this game to me has been like well, my heart tells me, but I really think, like, everything data wise to me is like the Cowboys should take care of business in this game. And, like, I would have a lot more faith in them, but, like, my feelings of it are like, this is a game the Ravens should probably lose, but they'll somehow put it together. They'll find a way to be effective running the ball. They've done so against the Cowboys numerous times. I believe, like, 3 of their matchups, they've had over 250 rushing yards. The 2020 game, they had like 298.
Well, in that 2008 game, they had the back-to-back. Again, I really didn't want to relive that, but thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't mentioning that one. I was just talking about recent history, but you go off, King. But this is a game that, like, they will somehow figure it out. They'll run roughshod. They'll get like 150 yards on the ground between Henry and Lamar and maybe even Justice Hill. They'll play sound defense, and CD will go for like 54 yards and get like 2 or 3 first downs, and people will be like, Ravens figured it out. They're super ready. Everything's great. They're ready to go take on the Bills at home. Prime time next week. Like, everybody's going to be so locked in and expectant of this positivity. And then the other thing I think is just, like, the team will be able to lash out, be like, you guys didn't believe in us, and, like, that whole spiel. Like, that's what I'm expecting to happen. That's what those are just purely the vibes and feeling of what's going on right now.
I'm completely with you. Like, I can totally close my eyes. I don't have to squint at all. And I can see Derrick Henry being interviewed, like, still in uniform in the visitors' locker room, being like, yeah, I didn't really have any particular motivation, free agency is what it is. I just wanted to play well. I wanted to get my first win as a Raven, but like underneath him on like in the NFL Network postgame, it's like 16 carries, 296 yards, 4 touchdowns. You know what I mean? Like that's just exactly what this feels like because I mean, when there's blood in the water with the Cowboys, you can really smell it. And that's what's going on here. Defensively, you talked about the Ravens, obviously all the issues, just so we're kind of aware, this is obviously a matchup preview. I was going to say of sorts, but it's literally that. So, I mean, the Cowboys don't have on Wednesday, we're actually recording this on Wednesday afternoon for full context, but on Wednesday morning, they had no real options along the interior of their defensive line. Jordan Phillips then was revealed to be headed to the injured reserve with a wrist injury. Later on Wednesday afternoon, he came out and said, actually, I don't have a wrist injury, which creates a whole set of drama in and of itself, but he's still not an option for them nonetheless. Mozzie Smith now apparently has a back issue, which again, just makes a bad situation even worse. If only this had been predictable over the course of the last 9 months, as Kyle mentioned, when the Cowboys could have done something about it. So they can't stop the run. Their running back room, I wrote about this on Wednesday at our site, is literally the most ineffective one in all of the NFL. And was also completely and totally predictable. Zeke Elliott, thank you for the memories, but what a surprise. Bringing him back in 2024 didn't totally save the world. That was completely and totally obvious. It didn't have to be Derrick Henry, but it could have been Devin Singletary, or you could have kept Tony Pollard, or Austin Eckler, or Braylon Allen, or Marshawn Lloyd. Any one of these options would have been a much better situation than what they have going on, which is why, again, yes, Dak is very good. CD's very good, but that's the show, man. Like, that's it. Like, and I completely trust, John Harbaugh and the rest of the Ravens staff to eliminate that the way the Saints did last week.
Or you could have called Derrick Henry. Like,
I mean, dude, doesn't that, again, it like, I can feel that. Like, I can feel that coming in the wind. It's going to be bad.
That, would you say like going all in would be something appropriate by like calling up Derrick Henry?
We're sick of the all in, just to be clear. We've all in enough. But yeah, like, I mean, can't you just hear Kevin Burkhardt, being like, they didn't even call him as he scampers in for touchdown number 3. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
It's going to be really, you talked about feel and heart, and that's what football is all about, obviously, besides actual data and objective evidence and stuff. But the feel and the vibes here for the Cowboys, and you mentioned primetime next week. The Ravens and Bills are what, Monday night next week?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, I asked because the Cowboys play on Thursday Night Football next week. They're in New York to take on the Giants. So, like, I could totally see the Cowboys being, this is, what that's like. It's like, well, especially like by this time next week, we're going to have played 2 games. Like, they're condensing everything they're doing. And that's just the life and challenge of the NFL. But I can totally see them not giving this their full attention, because at the end of the day, I'd rather win that Giants game than the Ravens game for obvious reasons. I mean, again, it would prove a lot more if they beat the Ravens, but the Giants game is much more valuable. So actually, before we get to official game picks, I did want to, you touched on this, for anyone who doesn't know, and I don't know why anybody would know our emails and conversations at SB Nation, but Kyle has, correct me if I phrase this improperly, Kyle has done tremendous work relative to the kicking game, and he had a motivation to do so because Justin Tucker has been incredible for a very long time. So it was really just Kyle bragging about how much better Justin Tucker was relative to the rest of the NFL. But we used to bum that off of you relative to Dan Bailey and his production, obviously, because he was going shot for shot with him for a while. So you've done extensive research and analysis on the kicker position in the NFL for the last 12, 13 years now, since 2012. So your assessment on Brandon Aubrey as a trained eye in this particular area?
He's so good. I mean, there have been 2 times now in my career studying kickers, watching kickers, that I've ever, because so quickly people would be like, this guy's the next Justin Tucker. They've done it with every young, talented kicker.
You did it with Dan Bailey
for the past 5 years. Dan Bailey was neck and neck with him for many, many years. And it wasn't until, he just was no longer that guy that it fractured it. And then I always would argue the edge was like, he kicks half his games in a dome. Justin Tucker kicks half of his games in the nightmare weather conditions of the AFC North. And Cleveland is one of the hardest places to be a kicker in the NFL. I've been told by just about every kicker and every special teams person I talked to. So that was always my gripe with it. But twice I've been like, this guy's actually incredibly good. Like, you can see his mechanics are smooth. His operation is good. One of them was Harrison Butker, which specifically with kicking, he's very good. Just his every other take of his
Okay.
leaving it, just talking kicking, just talking
Sure.
kicking. He is a
Okay.
very accurate and good kicker. Brandon Aubrey, I tweeted this too, like earlier this season. Like watching Aubrey kick is like there. It's just obvious that he's so good at it. Like his mechanics, the fluidity, his strength as a kicker is so noticeable. Like his, I've been told like he doesn't even have to like do the full wind up as and like attack the ball in the same way that like Justin Tucker did. Like Justin Tucker attacks the ball very aggressively in his kicking, and Aubrey's strength is just so otherworldly right now, be it because he's young or just because he has his specific mechanics so fine-tuned for himself that it's not even required that he has to hit that thing with such an aggressive attack in the same manner. But I really think, and the only reason he wasn't on my top 10 kickers list is just he has not had the minimum career
Sure.
thresholds to be on the all-time accuracy list, but he's well on his way and he's dominating kicks everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's short or if it's 66 yards that he almost tied an NFL career and should have probably got a crack at 71. I mean, that'd have been pretty sick to watch personally.
It does feel inevitable. Well, I appreciate your insight and for anyone who's unaware, Kyle is the person to go to. Chuck Zada. I don't know if you ever did any work with Chuck from Inside the Pylon, but Chuck was my kicker guy for a long time, but then it became Kyle. So, you're the kicker guy. You know what I mean? So, but last thing as it relates to kicking and then official game picks. Speaking of your tweets, and Kyle is on Twitter at Kyle P. Barber, by the way. We'll put the link to it down below. Interesting that he got all pissed off at me for saying Kyle Barber when it's literally in his Twitter handle, but whatever.
It's too late.
Anyway, you tweeted that Justin Tucker on Wednesday, once again, was in full garb on Wednesday. Can you explain exactly what you meant and why it was peculiar for you?
Yeah. So going out to practice, Justin Tucker was in a full game uniform. I don't recollect him doing so, at least not in the full purple uniform. That might be why it stuck out because he's not wearing like the black or the white pants. But to my recollection, I don't typically see him in full like game attire.
You're saying this was like his like purple uniform, not like a purple practice jersey.
No, like he was in his full game attire. So everybody goes out there in their normal jersey, but he had like the pants on, he had like the full game fit helmet on instead of like hanging out with a hat pregame and stuff. And like during the warm-ups or during the special teams period, he was in full game uniform. And, you can't help but wonder if that's because of just the struggles with him with distance kicking. That's been a huge hot topic over the past few weeks, of course. And, and he's answered questions. He's, he was very honest and forthright. He's like, this is obviously not my favorite topic to talk about. But yes, I've had some struggles. I'd have to pull up the specific quote, but essentially he's like, it's just, I'm just really focused on the next kick. Like I really need to focus on the next one. Like there's no point in like, commiserating about the ones I've missed. I feel bad about it. He's like I missed 3 points on Tuesday on Sunday. And we, clearly needed those points because they lost by 3. And like that 50-yarder could have been the difference in tying and different game situations, all that. And, so he's understanding of it. I think there's a little bit of pressure on Tucker for the first time in terms of like accuracy and something he's been most notable about, which is, distance kicking. Every time for 5+ years now, maybe even 10, it's been anytime Tucker misses like a 50-yarder, like ESPN, NFL Network, Around the NFL, PFF, every big main accounts like Justin Tucker missed a 50-yard field goal. The world is ending. Hell's frozen over, and they post all these ridiculous gifs. And over the last 2 years, it hasn't been the same since 2022. It's different. So yes, I noticed him out there in full game uniform for Wednesday's practice.
Interesting. I've always said like if I was a coach and like we were gonna wear like blue jerseys this week, that's what we would practice in. So like I totally like respect Justin Tucker being like, well, let me fully simulate the game to the best that I can, especially if he's struggling. The Ravens at this moment in time are 1.5-point favorites on the road against the Cowboys. I mentioned how the Cowboys had allowed 44 points, at least 44 in back-to-back games. They were massive favorites in each of those games. They were 6.5-point favorites against the Saints, and they were 7-point favorites against the Packers. So they're kind of all over the map right now. I'm picking the Ravens so that everybody knows. The last time, so you know, Kyle, that I picked against the Cowboys was the San Francisco game last year. And obviously the Niners beat the brakes off Dallas. So I'm taking the Ravens. I'm laying the 1.5. I just have no faith in the Cowboys against a Ravens team that I trust generally. I know there's been some bumps in the road, and that I feel is more desperate and better handling or better at hand. They're better at handling their desperation than the Cowboys have been in the last few years.
Like I said, the numbers, the data, all of that is just screaming to me that like the Cowboys are going to take care of this, and the Ravens are going to walk home, fly home 0-3. But just the feel and the heart and the emotion of this team and what I've seen and spoken to and dealt with in the locker room today and will for the rest of the week is just, it feels like this is a game they're going to get it together. It feels like a game that somehow, instead of last week against the Raiders being that tune-up game, that one that the palate cleanser post 9 months of Chiefs, you had 3 extra days to prep for that game. Instead, it's coming in week 3, and it should have happened last week against another AFC opponent, but instead it comes against this. So I think I'm going to take the Ravens. I think, I'll take them, 2-3 point win. Maybe it's even a Tucker 50-yarder just to really make just so every single storyline is just like, none of you believed in us. You all wrote us off. And then we're just going to have to hear the critique of fans that said there was overreaction and there's underreaction. And then it's just pure football chaos is just always on tap. Football is nothing but soap operas for football-loving men, and the drama never ceases, and that's what I'm expecting.
All right, that's 2 Ravens picks. Kyle Phoenix, despite what his Twitter handle tells you, you could change it if you wanted to. I mean, that's all I'm saying. But once again, we'll link to it down in the description below. Kyle, you're the best. As you leave, give us something to watch on Netflix, Disney, something that is not football related that you give your seal of approval to.
I'm this is going to fully expose me, but I just finished Attack on Titan.
Okay.
It is an anime, 4 seasons, phenomenal series. I believe it has like 5 of the top 10 highest rated IMDb episodes of all time.
Like of all time, not just
of all shows, of all television. Attack on Titan has like 4 or 5 of them. It's an incredible series. It is anime, obviously. So it might not be everybody's cup of tea, and I respect that, but I got put onto it, and I carved through that thing in my free time of training camp. And right before week 1 of the season, I finished that thing up, and it was worth every moment of enjoying that kind of content. And I would recommend it. It's on Crunchyroll.
Look at you. Look at you go. All the plugs. Well, any other Ravens related plugs before we fully get out of here?
Actually, yes. If you want Ravens content, this season pulled together all the journalists and beat writers covering the Ravens on a daily basis. Those that are actually at the castle, interviewing players, coaches, participating in media, because I've become more and more frustrated with the aggregator accounts that pull everybody else's content specifically and leaves the masquerade that it's their own and that they're the ones reporting it. I don't think that's something that you do, RJ. You cover the team, and you do so in writing and video and other forms of content. You don't scrape it like you did it specifically, like you're out there. You don't pretend that. There's a contingent of Ravens media members that are very disingenuous about it that I'm pretty frustrated. And so what I did is I got bios from every Baltimore Ravens coverage beat reporters. I have them link some of their favorite stories that they published or relatable ones, and it's all in a single document on Baltimore Beatdown. I'll send it over to you. Maybe that can be linked at the bottom for folks to check out Baltimore Ravens news in the lead up of their Week 3 matchup against the Ravens.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll throw that in. So send that my way. And Kyle, you have a great rest of your day and enjoy what I'm sure will be Derrick Henry's finest hour on Sunday afternoon.
Can't wait.